Hi, my name's Carl Herzog. I'm the Public Historian for the USS Constitution Museum. If you're watching this video, you probably already know that the USS Constitution Museum is dedicated to providing a huge array of educational lessons and experiences, in addition to telling a ton of historical stories, all through the lens of a single ship, USS Constitution. Well, in Stockholm, Sweden, there's a kind of similar museum dedicated to a single ship, the warship Vasa. But unlike Constitution, that has been afloat and working for 200 plus years, the Vasa, which was also a centuries old sailing warship, actually only lasted one day. The Vasa, if you've never heard the story, capsized and sunk in the harbor about 1,300 meters from her launch spot on the day of her launch on her maiden voyage. After sinking in Stockholm Harbor, the ship was salvaged a little bit, but then stayed there for 300 years until it was resurrected in the 1960s and turned into a complete museum. So it might be hard to imagine that these two ships share any of the common lessons to teach us, but in fact they do. Despite the fact that the Vasa sailed in 1628, about 170 years before Constitution, the two ships are products of design processes that were either significantly flawed, in the case of the Vasa, or much more well thought out and planned in the case of Constitution. Now, granted, Constitution certainly benefited from that extra 170 years of advances in ship design, but from both of these ships, we can learn a lot about the design process and about the engineering requirements that go into designing a ship like this. The exact reasons why the Vasa sunk have been studied extensively, as you can imagine, at the Vasa Museum and by others ever since the ship was resurfaced in the 1960s. At the core, the reason the ship capsized and sunk in the harbor was because it was unstable. It was built with a very shallow hold and a very heavy high center of gravity from two levels of guns that were put on board. When the wind began to fill the sails of the ship and heel the ship over ever so slightly, the lower gun ports began down flooding, filling with water, which further eroded the stability of the vessel and caused it to further roll and eventually sink right in the harbor. Now, the broader question is, how did you end up with a design like that in the first place? Well, for starters, it's important to understand that unlike Constitution, when Joshua Humphreys was designing her in the 1790s, in the 1620s, when Vasa was being designed, ship design, particularly warship design, was nowhere near as advanced. It was still far more of an art than a science, and a lot of the engineering and design ideas had not really established themselves. Another thing to keep in mind is that in the 1620s, naval sailing tactics were still in their infancy. The idea of broadsides of guns firing at each other was still a relatively new sort of naval tactic. And so there were fewer ships that had been designed with this many guns. And it's a lot of guns. The full weight of a broadside of Vasa's cannons, if she'd ever been able to fire them, is about equal in a weight of metal to that of Constitution, even though she's only about 2/3 the tonnage of Constitution. So except for a failure to understand the design, one of the other things that keeps people fascinated by Vasa is the fact that the King of Sweden reportedly changed his mind about what kind of ship he wanted and what the functionality of that ship was going to be halfway through the design process. As you might imagine, this has made the Vasa quite a case study for everybody from engineering schools to, most importantly, even business management schools, because she's definitely a lesson in failed project management. By contrast, when Joshua Humphreys began designing USS Constitution, not only were engineering criteria much more well understood, but the design of Constitution and the other early American frigates went through something of a more rigorous design process. The engineering design process is something that we use Constitution to teach in educational programs at the museum even today. The idea of first having a clear understanding of what your goals are. What is it you expect the functionality of this vessel to be? In the case of Constitution, it was a combination of having the power of a ship of the line, but the swiftness of a frigate that could move across great distances. Because the early United States Navy wasn't going to build a large fleet of line vessels, they were looking for this kind of unique hybrid that would meet a variety of these needs. The design of Constitution was built around it. This line drawing is a modern copy of a 1794 plan that was based on Joshua Humphrey's original plan. These kinds of half-hull model plans that show you the lines and the shape of the hull below deck were something that did not really exist in the same form in the 1620s when Vasa was being built. At the time, when asked to build a vessel then, the shipbuilders were essentially just given a general size of the vessel and began laying down a keel to accommodate that. At one point, the King of Sweden reportedly wanted two medium-sized vessels rather than a larger and a smaller one as he had originally ordered, and there was for a long time some debate over whether or not the keel of Vasa had been extended, thus making it a completely different ship than it had previously been. They're not sure that turned out to really be the case. Constitution, certainly by the time that the keel was being laid, was clearly well thought out, but still had to face the second processes of the design process, which was prototyping and testing. Models were made of Constitution, half-hulls like this, and after Constitution was launched, testing continued to go on to see whether or not it was working the way it had been expected. Despite the calculations of stability and volume that went into the design, there was still a responsiveness to the way the ship handled under sail that wasn't exactly what was expected when the ship was first launched. Although she would later develop this wonderful reputation as Old Ironsides and being both a swift sailor and a hardy opponent in battle, when the ship was first launched, the earliest captains had complained about the fact that she did not sail very well at all. As a result, one of the things that they did was adjust the trim of the vessel, moving ballast down in the hold of the vessel from one area to another that would change how much of what section of the hull was in the water and consequently how the ship moved through the water when it was under sail. When the Constitution Museum is open to the public, one of our more popular exhibits is an interactive video challenge that allows you to design your own virtual warship. You get to choose how many guns you want on it, how long and wide the ship will be, and the computer calculates out some of the volume and weight involved in that, and then you can launch your ship and go off to fight others on an interactive shared screen environment. Now, needless to say, ship design has continued to get even more complicated in the modern era with huge container ships capable of carrying tens of thousands of containers, or modern aircraft carriers capable of carrying hundreds of aircraft. But despite whatever the size of the ship is, the same principles still apply. Whether you're building a modern aircraft carrier or a 1790s wooden sailing frigate, or even a tiny little toy boat, the basics of weight, buoyancy, volume, displacement, and hull shape remain pretty much the same. These are the things that will govern the stability of the vessel and its ability to move through the water. And the design process to reach that is still the same too. Before you can even begin to think about any of those criteria, you want to take a look at what the point of having your boat or ship in the first place is. If it's a lightweight recreational vessel, maybe you don't need to worry about carrying tens of thousands of shipping containers or hundreds of fighter aircraft, or thousands of iron balls to load your guns with. I think the universality of these principles is part of what makes the Constitution and other ships such great venues for learning about the engineering design process and for learning about the basics of ship design, stability, buoyancy, and the like. If you'd like to learn more about ship design and the engineering design process, we have a number of activities available on the USS Constitution Museum website that you can conduct. If you look under our Discover and Learn section under Educator Resources, you'll see that we have an entire section on design and construction that includes a number of activities designed for a variety of age levels and include a number of activities that you can do at home. So I hope that provides you some insight into how USS Constitution was originally designed and what they were hoping for, and why it turned out to be a more successful design than, say, the warship Vasa 170 years earlier. Ship design is still an ongoing process, and just like Constitution, testing is still continuing on even the most modern designs. Navy warships today still undergo years' worth of extensive testing and changes to design before they settle into something that really works. And even after that, it's constantly being tweaked and adjusted for constant improvement based on the experiences they have. Constitution was certainly no different, and as its functions changed over the years, and as its armament changed over the years, additional changes were made to the ship as well. If you have questions or comments about anything we've talked about today, don't hesitate to post any of our social media. And as always, if you have suggestions on future videos you'd like to see or any other questions, don't hesitate to post any of our social media outlets as well. Thanks for joining us. Bye.